So it's an honor to have tonight here Dr. E. Michael Jones, and we'll talk about art, beauty, and related topics. So hi, Mike.
Hi, Tony. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I was just asking you when you talk about essence, the word that comes out in Croatian would be translated back as gist, crux, or core. So
right.
Are we talking about?
That's the colloquial meaning of essence, but it's not the philosophical meaning of essence. So what we're talking about here is man's understanding of being. And the Greeks were the masters at this. They developed a very philosophical language from the beginning, completely different than the Hebrews. So Parmenides says that which is cannot come from that which is not. Metaphysics at this period of time before Socrates, the Hebrews would never have come up with a sentence like that. Never in a million years. It was their language was very concrete. You know, that man is like a tree planted near running water that never moves, whose leaves never fade. God is a rock. It's very concrete, okay? And that's the difference. So the Greeks had this understanding of being, a very sophisticated understanding. Over a period of time, this understanding developed with people like Thomas Aquinas, who understood that being had two aspects to it, essence and existence. So how can I explain the difference between essence and existence? According to essence, all dogs have four legs. Right? You understand that? Dogs have four legs. Okay. Now I have seen with my own eyes a dog that has three legs. Okay, that's existence. Now that's an accident. Okay, this is not part of the nature of a dog. This dog, something happened to the dog. He lost a leg in an accident, but there is an actual dog that has three legs, but that's not the essence of a dog. The essence of the dog is to have four legs. Do you understand? So that's the difference between essence and existence. Do you understand? It's crucial distinction we have to make because the whole art book revolves around that distinction. Do you understand the distinction now?
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. And let's say the art that I can relate to it most would be architecture.
Right. That's right. And that's the easiest way to begin. So we could begin with Plato. Plato, very influential figure in art history. And Plato has basically the world divided into two parts. There was the superluminary sphere. We're talking about spheres that go around the Earth, and they kind of move. And the planet and stars are embedded in the spheres. And above the moon, you have the realm of essence, or the realm which never changes. And that's where you find forms. And so there's a form for just about everything. But the simplest way to talk about form would be to talk about like a circle, a triangle, or a square. These are geometrical forms. And they don't exist anywhere. So you'll never see a circle. You may see a round ball, or around this, or around that, but you'll never see a circle because it exists in that realm above the moon. The opposite of that is the world that we live in, which is constant flux, constant change. Above there, nothing changes. Below, everything changes. And it changes so much that you can't say anything about it. There's nothing you can say about things that change all the time. There's no science, there's no nothing. Now, Heraclitus was more sophisticated than Plato, even though he came before him, and he'd say things like, he'd talk about the flame. I think he was influenced by Zoroastrianism because he was living in the Persian Empire. The flame is always the same and it's always changing, like a candle flame. Okay?
Yeah,
but that's not Plato. So the simplest way that we have art, the simplest form of art is Platonic, which is basically the mind accesses that sphere. It apprehends a form. Let's say the form is the triangle. brings it down, and then it imposes that form on matter. So you now have a triangular piece of stone. And then you can do the same thing with a rectangle, and you can do the same thing with a circle. So now you have, let's say, circles, but they're elongated, so they're pillars. So you can take the pillars, and then you put that square block of stone on top of that, and you put the triangle on top of that, and you've got a temple. And this is the first piece of architecture, and it's sacred architecture. Because it's a combination, it's the world of forms, the supernatural realm, now in matter, imposed on matter. And that idea of art just took over the world, because that's the way it began. It's just simple, and anybody can understand it. So you have matter, if you take it, and let's take it in time, which we would call dialectically. You have matter, which is real, but it's not really meaningful. Doesn't have any meaning. And then you have an idea, which is meaningful, but it's not real. Let's say the triangle. I have an idea of a triangle. Okay? Now, when you put those two things together, so the first part would be existence, right?
Okay.
Just a piece of rock. Second part is essence. It's the form of a triangle. And now, if you impose essence on existence, you have something that is both real and meaningful at the same time, and that's known as beauty or art.
Okay.
According to Plato.
Okay. So where I can see the transition, I happen to live, let's say, on the Adriatic coast. It was inhabited first by the Romans, so it was well, busy place in the antiquity, and basically the Romans basically took the culture and the ideas from the Greeks.
Right.
If I'm correct.
Right.
So the Roman idea of let's say of an Adriatic town is basically a military camp. You get streets, they are vertical one to another. Let's say like in New York, and you kind of impose these rows of boxes, and you do the wall that is a rectangle around it.
Right.
So this is like the settlement from the Roman antiquity time.
Right.
So in the late antiquity, the place is Christianized. You have now the Christendom and the other idea. So how does the let's say the Mediterranean, the Adriatic town looks in Christendom?
All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you have like the bell tower, the church that is like central on the top, and around it you have this organic structure of houses that are every single house is different from one another. But if you put it together and you look it from afar, it's really nice. It's a nice scene. It's really nice thing to look at.
Right. I've been to the Makarska Riviera.
Yeah.
I rode along the bluff, and then we drove down to some town. I forgot. I don't think it was Makarska. I think it was smaller, like a village. One of those little villages. There's a little bay there, and it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful because there was this perfect mixture of nature and culture.
Yeah.
Like nature and culture really went well together. This is what Europe is like. It's nature and culture in a really good balance. My favorite example has always been Bavaria, where I think there's just this perfect balance of nature and culture. Like the Koenigsee. Have you been to the Koenigsee in Bavaria?
No, thanks to the Autobahn.
It's a long lake, okay, and they've really preserved the lake. The water is absolutely clear. You can't, no motorboats, they only have electric boats on it. And then you sail along, it's about 3 miles long, you get to the end, and there's a church situated on the beach with the cliffs coming down the lake. It's absolutely beautiful. So you got this perfect mixture of nature and culture.
Yeah.
Now, the Roman military camp is more like imperialism. In other words, you impose this camp on a conquered people. And so I've been to the Roman camp in Xanten. I lived right up on the Rhine. Across the other side of the Rhine, I lived on the German or the barbaric side of the Rhine. The other side was the Latin or the civilized Rhine, and they imposed a military camp at Xanten. And basically, you just impose that order on nature. Now, in the lower Rhine, it's flat. It's like a pool table. It's so flat. And so it's easy to impose that on something that is flat. But with the Makarska Riviera, the landscape is much more imposing. It's not as simple as the flat lower of the Rhine, because you have that steep, you're up on the bluff and you come down to the Adriatic. So you have to have some type of accommodation of the landscape, accommodation of the terrain, much more there than you did. Now that's okay, so that's everywhere. No matter where you're going to build, you got to come to grips with the terrain. Okay? It's that simple. You can't have architecture unless it's in a place. But there's something more important happened here over this period of time. And this is the essence of this book. And I don't think anybody has talked about it. And I'm talking about people who should have talked about it, namely Jacques Maritain and Etienne Gilson, two of the most famous Thomists of the 20th century. They got it wrong. They got it wrong because they were Platonists when it came to aesthetics. And I've already explained to you what that means. Okay? Now, what Plato and Aristotle had in common was that they didn't know about creation. They didn't know that the world was created. Aristotle thought that the world was eternal. So Aristotle said art is imitation of nature. Now that's a step beyond Plato, because Plato never said that, as far as I can tell. But Aristotle did say art is imitation of nature, which means you're now taking nature seriously, as opposed to the Platonic form being imposed on matter, which is more the Platonic idea. But he didn't know that nature was created. Now, if nature is created, it's a work of art, and God is the artist. And if nature is a work of art, then all you have to do is follow nature, and you will ultimately be able to come up to some type of design simply by following nature. So in other words, because of Christianity, you have trust in nature that you never had before in pagan antiquity, either with the Romans or with the Greeks. You simply didn't have it because, Plato said it was meaningless. It's flux. It's just change. It's meaningless. But now you've got a whole different situation. And so Aquinas said, he reversed Plato. He basically said, existence calls essence into being. It's the opposite of what I just said. The opposite, Plato says, essence gets imposed on existence. That's a kind of imperialism, that would be appropriate for a Roman camp in conquered countries. Aquinas is the exact opposite. Existence calls essence into being. Which means if you look at existence long enough, let's say nature, a form will emerge from it itself. You're not composing it anymore. Now, it's not going to be obviously different than circles or triangles. Obviously, that's going to be part of it, but it will emerge in a much more sophisticated form. Okay. And this is precisely the achievement of Giotto. So Giotto, according to Vasari, who's the historian of the Renaissance art, Giotto abandoned the tyrannical models of the Greeks. Now, I think what he meant by that is the icon. The East never abandoned the icon. To this day, they still make icons, but the icon has basically a gold background. There's nothing in the background. It's very stylized, and there's a gold background. Giotto breaks with that, and he starts doing landscapes in the background of his paintings. And at this point, because you have this faith in nature, you have a much more sophisticated understanding of everything Now you can have a much more sophisticated understanding of the Gospels, for example. Like, how do you do an icon of Christ asleep in the boat? One of the stories in the Gospel. Well, you don't. Basically, you don't do that. That just doesn't exist there. But now, because you have this understanding of nature, you can put drama into the paintings. This is action. You can put psychology into the paintings. Because you can look at the figures on the boat, they're scared. There's Christ asleep, the apostles are scared, the wind is blowing, the waves. This is powerful. It didn't exist before. You simply did not have this power. And I'm saying it was because of Thomas Aquinas' understanding of the priority of existence over essence.
I have two questions. Well, first, I would like to go back to the architecture and to the following of nature. So what happens now? The Germans are disciplined people, and they manage to preserve their nice landscape and the architecture that goes with it. In Croatia, what happens? Like this tourism brings in investors and people that buy real estate, and what they do, they build these concrete glass boxes and just litter the scenery with it, so it becomes well, not a pleasant thing to see. They basically destroy their own value by bringing these boxes around. That was like one line of thinking, and the other one is maybe like postmodernism, in a way, an overshooting of a reaction against this, what you would call tyranny of Platonism. I mean, they do reject straight lines and stuff.
Yeah, if you're talking about modernism, it's Bauhaus was the expression of it in architecture, and the main proponent of that was Walter Gropius, and he loved the machine. So he called his apartment buildings home machines. They're machines for living in. And that was an unnatural reduction of the complexity of human life. It goes back to the Enlightenment, the French Enlightenment, to Julien de la Mettrie, who wrote a book called Man and Machine. So this is materialism now at the time of the French Revolution. And man is a machine, and so everything gets streamlined, and you end up with Bauhaus ugliness. Everybody gets sick of it after a while because it's so boring. And they decide we've had enough. And at that point, there's a crisis. And I cover this in the book. Where are you going to go now? Nobody wants to do the glass box anymore. Which direction are you going to go in? Well, you have Frank Gehry, the Jew, who decides to have a crooked box. It's basically a box, or maybe better than a box, a trash bag. Let's have a trash bag instead of a box. That's the Jewish direction, and that's called postmodernism. The other side is the Catholic dimension. At the same time, we're talking about 1978, you have Thomas Gordon Smith, who ends up as a professor at Notre Dame and basically takes over the architecture school at Notre Dame and turns it into a classical architecture school. And he goes back to Vitruvius. So those are the two directions that it took at that point after everybody got sick of modernism.
Well, modernism was in basically a box or a rectangle that is tyrannical form.
It came about. I think it came about largely because after World War II, they needed a lot of architecture. Basically, the Americans and the British had destroyed all of German cities, and they needed to build them up quickly. And this was easy to build. It was cheap and easy to build, and nobody liked it. Nobody liked it. And so finally, the Germans, when you allowed them enough time, they rebuilt Dresden the way it was. They rebuilt Würzburg. All these cities turned out looking very nice looking cities because they were traditional German cities.
Okay, so what happens? So basically we do have some kind of a development of the idea of beauty and of the idea of the aesthetics. How does this strange trend of, let's say, sacred architecture that is uglier instead of of more beautiful, or how does that fit in? You have this, let's say, you have from the late antiquity into the Middle Ages, this development of the architecture that has its pinnacle into the building of churches, and then you come into the modern era, or let's say postmodern, if you are postmodern today, and let's say the sacred architecture is not as beautiful as it was.
No. So the development of sacred architecture was pretty simple. It was basically you have two pillars and you have a beam across them, and that's called a temple. Okay, and then you put the pyramid on top of the beam. And then what you can do, you still have two pillars, but now you can put an arch across them. And now you have Romanesque architecture, and that developed, for centuries. And then you get to the point where you can have a vault over that, and that's Gothic architecture. And so that's pretty much the way sacred architecture developed, with a lot of decoration on the cathedral. And then we had a crisis called the Protestant Reformation, during which the worst of it, basically what you had was iconoclasm. And I talk about that in the book, primarily with art. But iconoclasm also affected the churches, particularly in the Spanish Netherlands. So what we call Holland today was just one after another church was destroyed. And so they had to be rebuilt. And the time they're being rebuilt is the time of the Counter-Reformation. And so what you have, instead of going back to the Gothic church that was there before, you have a Baroque church with all sorts of decoration, expressing the kind of confidence that the Catholic Church had at that point in taking back Europe. There was a crisis at this point in art. In painting, basically, the painters got so realistic. They could paint such realistic figures that the mimesis got to be so good that there was a temptation on the part of the painter or the patron to a kind of sensuality that wasn't appropriate, and the painters were heading toward pornography. Titian expresses this very well. He was caught in this conflict. He had patrons who wanted him to do pornography, and he was kind of caught in the middle. So he did that famous painting of Venus and the musician, where there's a musician who's playing on the organ with one hand, and there's a naked woman behind him, that's Venus, and he's looking at her crotch. He's not looking at her face, and you can see this is where the artist is at this point. Because his best friend was Pietro Aretino, who was the first pornographer. Because Venice got the printing press before any place else in Italy, and as soon as they got a printing press, they did wood cuts of pornographic scenes, and they published a book called I Modi, or the Positions. So the crisis there at this point is 1525. The German mercenaries come down, and they didn't get paid, so they sacked Rome, and they stable their horses in the Sistine Chapel. And they are scandalized because there's all these naked figures on the wall. You know the Sistine Chapel. And they go back to Germany at the beginning of iconoclasm. And so they wreck all these churches, and then the Counter-Reformation kicks in, and Rubens comes along, and he restores all these churches in a new style called the Baroque. And that's great, and everything's fine until World War II, which destroyed more architecture than anything in history. Anything. There was nothing compared to the Allied bombing campaign on Germany. And now you've got a problem, okay, because you've got to rebuild all of this type of stuff. These people have to have a place to live. Those towns took centuries to come into the form that they had, and these people need a place to sleep tonight. So what are you going to do? And that led to Bauhaus, and then it led to a sense of, well, the Germans didn't want to talk about the past anymore. And so with the Second Vatican Council, you got Ratzinger saying, we need to be positive. Let's not talk about this negative stuff. Let's move forward. The church has nothing to fear from the modern world. And that's where you got all those ugly churches. because they were basically inspired by kind of by Bauhaus and by bad liturgy. You have bad architecture combining with bad liturgy, and you have the preposterous churches that I saw when I was living in Germany. So one of them had a crucifix made out of automobile bumpers, and the Stations of the Cross were abstract expressionist Stations of the Cross. That's ridiculous. The whole point of the Stations of the Cross is to make you identify with the sufferings of Jesus Christ by looking at his wounds and the struggle, all that other type of stuff. So that was social engineering. Basically, Germany was ruined by social engineering. We could talk about that for hours on end. We're still suffering from the effect of social engineering on Germany. And the main issue right now is the Synod, which is basically proof that they were socially engineered and their sexual morals were corrupted. But I'm just saying, that had found expression in the architecture in Germany.
Okay. So how does the let's say the theological assumption that nature is to be perfected, and that is, like, let's say, the Catholic position, and the more Protestant position,
right,
as I see it, is like nature is to be covered with grace, or
right.
How does this fit in
that's a profound distinction here. Okay, so Catholic theology says grace perfects nature, it doesn't destroy it. Okay, if you want to look at a place where go to a Protestant country like America. It's not Protestant anymore, but it was in its roots. And you have these Calvinists coming over from England, full of this Calvinist theology that you sort of mentioned, which Calvin got from Luther, which is that grace either destroys nature because it's so sinful, or it covers over the sin. The way snow covers shit. That's what Luther said. Okay? Now that's so what you find here is a radical dichotomy between man and nature. And what you had with the ecological movement in the United States, which became powerful because the United States ruled the world, basically nature is the opposite of man. So in other words, if you want to preserve nature, you have to exclude man from nature. Because anytime you bring man in, he ruins it. Well, that's pretty true of America, because they did ruin a lot of because they didn't have that concept of grace perfecting nature, and they had to build up the country in a hurry, and so they just raped. I mean, basically, they cut down every tree in Michigan. Which they all grow back, and my house is made out of some of the wood from those trees in Michigan, but it's not a really good way to begin this. So it comes like somebody who noticed this was Werner Heisenberg, who grew up in Bavaria and loved hiking in the mountains in Bavaria. And so when you hike in the mountains in Bavaria, you go through the woods, you walk, climb up the mountain. Oh, and there's a restaurant on the top of the mountain. Well, that's exactly what you want to have on the top of the mountain after you spent all day hiking. But if it's America, well, what's it going to be? McDonald's? You're going to have McDonald's on top of the mountain, and then if you put McDonald's up there, you have to have a huge parking lot. And if you put those two things together, you wreck the mountain. No one would ever want to go there. And so you have the phenomenon like the Appalachian Trail, which is basically this boring tunnel through trees that goes 2,000 miles through the most inhospitable terrain in America. If you walk through Pennsylvania, Appalachian, there are rocks that just cut your shoes to shreds. It's inhospitable. Lots of America is not fit for human habitation, like the Southwest. It's an awful place. You don't want to be there. So Heisenberg comes to America, and he ends up in Colorado, and he climbs a mountain, and he hates it. He absolutely hates it because there's no restaurant on top of the mountain. I'm hungry. I need to eat. I'm saying this is Catholic culture. Catholic culture is you can have the restaurant, and it's not going to destroy the mountain. I did this when I was in Zakopane. I climbed one of the mountains there. You know, first of all, Zakopane, the mountains are right there, outside of town. You can walk to the mountains from your where you stay. Halfway up, there was a restaurant. That's exactly what you need halfway up, is a restaurant. Where they give you a bowl of soup and you have some beer, and then you can continue the rest of the way. America doesn't have the idea. You just don't have the idea. If man comes in, he's going to wreck everything. So you have to keep man out in order to preserve nature.
Wow. Okay. Well, the same. Let's say the similar thing is happening also in the let's say in the wine industry. Or in the wine profession. You basically have this old, let's say, continental view of the wine that has also its liturgical and sacramental dimension. But the idea of the wine, let's say here in Europe at least, it was that it's something that is given to you by nature, and with your work you have to work to perfect it. And instead, well, it got commercialized and other ideas are imposed. So basically now you have to, you have all kinds of products that you go and defeat the nature of the wine. You basically deconstruct what nature gives you, and you put it all back in a way that is fashionable and that can be marketed well.
Can you give me some specific examples here? I mean, first of all, is this the result of the European Union making universal standards?
No, not actually. It's basically the result of the tyranny of the blind tastings and the 100 points scales and all this wine culture. Let's say I would call it Western wine culture. That is imposed on us. One English late English philosopher said that the blind tasting is like blind kissing. So you'll be impressed by the nice smell and like maybe by the lips, but when you see the face, you don't necessarily want to spend the time. Yeah. So
this is a function of competition, though, isn't it? Isn't that what you're talking about? You're talking about a contest. You're competing here.
Yeah, you rate. You rate one symphony with 88 points, and you rate Bach with 83, and that nobody has to listen Bach anymore. You listen to the guy that has 85 points. So that's the idea.
By the way, this type of distortion crept into ballet. Like when my son was younger and just getting started in ballet, they had all of these contests. Well, the contest naturally tends toward rewarding a certain type of dancer. It's always a small guy who can jump up and do triple flips or 32, all this acrobatic stuff, which is not the essence of ballet. It's not acrobatics. If you want to see someone who doesn't understand that, there is a Chinese performance of Swan Lake. Okay? Now, the Chinese are great acrobats, but they think that ballet is simply the same as acrobatics. So the culmination of Swan Lake is this guy is standing there. He's got his arms out like this. He's got one ballerina standing on this shoulder. He's got one ballerina standing on this shoulder. He's got one on his head. He's got a ballerina on his head. And you're listening to Tchaikovsky. Da 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 da. What's that got to do with it? This is crazy. That's the Chinese misunderstanding of ballet. So you can introduce the same thing into wine, but wine. By its nature can't be competitive because it's rooted in a particular place.
That's right.
The wine is like cheese. If it comes from a certain area, it's going to have a certain flavor, it's going to have a certain quality, and that's not going to be like the wine in another place. So you can't have competition between them. They're different.
Yeah, we used to have every country used to have its own wine species. It evolved up to this point. That the grape, that the plant, in my place was different, had a different name and had different characteristics than the wine plant in France, let's say. But the problem was when when the wine was commercialized after the Second World War, and the United States, I mean America, South America, and Australia don't have their indigenous wine grape varieties. So they all you have these American generals uh, finishing the war in France, and they like the wine, and they just bring the French varieties and replant them all over the United States, in California. So you have basically a village in France called Chardonnay, and you have the grape variety that grows there called Chardonnay, and now you have Chardonnay all over California. So it's kind
isn't
of
that illegal now? Isn't that illegal in the Soviet? I mean, in the European Union.
Yeah.
That's
right. Yeah. The let's say the Europeans. The idea was to impose the European Union ideas about wine on the Americans, but it won't fly because the United States were much stronger economically, and they basically you cannot negotiate with them in that manner. We also have you basically if you are into legislation, you also have this basic misunderstanding about what wine is between the United States and Europe. So Europe has this let's say cultural heritage of the wine that sees use that includes the sacramental use, and it's basically illegal to put water in the wine in Europe. You cannot. It's all this like Germans. They developed all these laws regarding beer production. So you have similar laws and rules about wine too, that tend to preserve a certain idea. But in the U.S., the idea was, oh no, the markets will sort this out. You can do whatever you want until it's not toxic. If it's not poisonous and the winemaker makes it, it's legal, basically. So the wine that is produced according to this philosophy is chemically a different liquid than the wine made in the States or in that legislation, in that system. But America is much stronger economically, so you cannot like punish them or impose your idea that there in that place.
Yeah, well, you have the economies of scale.
Yeah.
Where especially during the Soviet era, like the 1950s, we went through this with beer in the United States of America. Like when I was a child, every city had its own brewery. And so it was the Schmitz Brewery in Philadelphia. There was, what was the beer? The beer that made Milwaukee famous. That was the slogan. Anyway, every city has its own brewery. Okay? And they were big. So, but you had basically three choices, maybe in a city, maybe two, maybe one. And then, of course, you got football. And then football became popular, and then you had advertising for football, and a lot of the ads were beer ads. But now you have a national market. And so you have these huge, absolutely huge communist Soviet-style breweries for the entire country. So Coors in Colorado and Anheuser-Busch in St. So huge. And it was all the same. So they came up with the idea of light beer. These people are driving the local breweries out of business. So the Ortley Brewing Company in Philadelphia came up with their own recipe for light beer. So they sell you a bottle of beer and a bottle of water. and then they give you instructions how you pour them both together, and now you have light beer. Okay? Now they went out of business. They went out of business because they were too honest. And they didn't have half-naked girls like the Coors, the Silver Bullet, all those half-naked girls dancing around in the snow during football games. But then a reaction is setting in right now of the return of the mini brewery, especially in places like Michigan. So we go to Lake Michigan, we go swimming there in the summer, and there's a little town, Sawyer, Michigan, and they have a great brewery, and they have really good beer, but it's completely local now. So the whole situation has gone, 180 degrees back to the old, back to the local, because everybody got tired of generic beer.
Yeah, it happened in the wine too. It's called, in the beer business, it's called the craft, craft brewery, at least here. And in the wine, in the wine market, you have similar thing. It was called, let's say, the big urge for the bio wine, or for the organic, or for the biodynamic. So
right.
Basically, but again, it ended up being commercialized. Like the big breweries buying all these small craft breweries, or in the wine sector, instead of giving to you the real natural and, let's say, the philosophically consistent idea what nature is and what natural wine should be, they sell you some this biodynamism, or this, let's say, spiritual some invented, basically, ideology that is in part spiritual.
Right. That's what happened. So you're talking basically about capitalism.
Yeah.
And capitalism basically producing. Let's reduce the price by increasing the economy of scale. Let's make bread in factories. That's a great idea. We can churn out this bread like a million loaves a day, and it'll only cost you 10 cents a loaf. And we'll put it in a plastic bag, and it tastes like shit, and nobody likes it. That's the bread I grew up with. And then there was a reaction, because that's not the way bread should be. You shouldn't put bread in a plastic bag. I guarantee you, it's awful once you put the bread in a plastic bag. Once you have supermarkets, once shelf life is the most important criterion, there goes bread down the drain. Because you have to buy bread fresh every day. That's why you live in a small town in Germany, they have a bakery, and you go there in the morning, your wife goes there in the morning, and she says hello to the baker, and your little chat, and you buy a loaf of bread, you take it home, you eat it, it was baked that day. You'll never get beyond that. You will never get bread that is better than that, because that's what bread is. So we have to respect the nature of the bread and resist the lure of the factory. Now, the same thing happened to art over this period of time, because they couldn't resist the lure of the factory, or the lure of financial manipulation. So the first problem is the camera. The camera basically destroys art, destroys mimesis. Because you don't think mimesis is important now, because a machine can do it. Right? So why should I struggle? Well, a machine cannot do this, because only the mind can organize all those details and create some type of unity. And that's the essence of beauty. It is diversity in unity. Unity in diversity. Architecturally, one of the greatest experiences I ever had was the Taj Mahal in India, which was done by a great Persian. It wasn't an Indian, it was a Persian. Where you walk out, you go in through the gate, big building with the gate, and you stand there on this platform, and you see everything all at once. And it's all unified. That's beauty. I've been to other gardens. You don't see that. You can go to Peterhof in St. Petersburg. It's beautiful parts to it, but you don't have that sense of unity. Versailles is too big. The DuPont Garden Winter Tour in Delaware, the United States, is an imitation of that. It's too big. You can't have the whole thing all at once. You can't see it all at once with all of its complexity. And so therefore, it's not. You don't think it's not beautiful. Not beautiful. That was part of it. So the problem here is that you thought a machine could do this for you, and it can't do this for you. So that killed mimesis, or it was a setback, especially in France. So they turned away from mimesis and did impressionism, and that became Cubism. Now, Cubism, I'm talking about Picasso. Now you have another element coming into it, and now you've got the Jewish art dealer. Because the farther you get away from imitation of nature, the more the dealer becomes important. because it's now a financial transaction, and basically nobody can tell whether it's right side up or upside down. It doesn't look like anything I've ever seen. But the dealer will say, it's called cubism, and I guarantee you, if you invest this much in it today, your price will increase, and you'll make that much money off it. And that was the beginning of the Jewish century in art. 1907, Kahnweiler, Picasso's dealer, continued in America after World War II, especially with Leo Castelli, who created pop art with Andy Warhol. It was all these Jewish businessmen trying to make money out of art, and it ruined art.
So where do you see it going from there in the visual arts?
It will go to the reductio ad absurdum, which I talk about in the book, which is basically nothing. It's called Io Sono, an Italian artist. Io Sono, okay? I am. Okay. Yeah, it means I am. But it's basically a pedestal with nothing on it, and you have a certificate that this is nothing, and this is how much it's worth. So that is a complete opposite of mimesis. On the other hand, you have the Italians returning to the tradition after all the fads have gone away. And Pietro Annigoni, do you know the works of Pietro Annigoni?
No.
You've probably seen the portrait of Queen Elizabeth is probably one of the greatest portraits of the 20th century. You can look it up on Google. He held an exhibition in 1947, in the great tradition of Italian art, and nobody came. Nobody came to his exhibition. At the time, they were buying Jackson Pollock wall eaters because Nelson Rockefeller was putting them up in Chase Manhattan Banks. Time magazine called him Jack the Dripper because he just dripped the paintings onto campus. So it came back, and now there is the man who just did St. Simon of Trent. I forget his name right now, the Italian, coming back to the tradition, and that's where it is right now. Because the other tradition has gone to the reductio ad absurdum, which is nothing.
Is it true the rumors that the let's say the U.S. Intelligence was involved in the art business?
Yes, it is true. The CIA got involved in promoting abstract expressionism because it was the opposite of socialist realism, of the type that the Soviet Union was proposing. Did you have socialist realism?
Yeah,
I don't remember seeing anything. I remember I was in Split, and I saw Mestrovich's statue of the bishop in Split.
Yeah, we do. It's Grogurninsky. It's a statue. It's a famous statue of Grogurninsky in Split. But we do have this social realism. I mean, we have lots of Second World War monuments around here, and it's always this, let's say, like this Apollonic working class guy with open shirt, like defiant, with big like bodybuilding guy, and with a bomb in one hand, or like in some threatening gesture. so yeah, we have. But these days, it's apparently it could be offensive because it's toxic masculinity, actually.
There you go. You're always some reason. I think that they have. I think that when you come into St. Petersburg, there's this you drive in, and then you come to this big building. I forget what it was, and there's this brilliant statue of Lenin. I think it's one of the best statues I've ever seen, where he's kind of striding toward you. It's a very dynamic statue. The coattails are kind of flying up as if the wind's blowing here. It's a great statue, absolutely great statue. And especially when you compare it to what was going on in the United States at that time, which was junk. I mean, basically, literally junk, this kind of twisted metal, and it got so bad that, so if it's on a pedestal, you know it's art. Okay? If it's next to the dumpster, they're going to throw it out. because you can't tell unless it's on a pedestal. So there are all these stories of great works of art that were too close to the dumpster, and somebody thought it was junk and put it in the dumpster and it got carted away, and that was the end of it. So you've got to make sure it's on the. So I saw this in Prague. I got there right after the fall. 1990, I was there. And there's this big pedestal, and it's empty. That used to be Stalin. Now it's empty.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to say, pedestals never stay empty. Okay, that's a rule of life. You cannot have an empty pedestal. And so, guess who was the next person on the pedestal? It was Michael Jackson.
Oh my God!
a statue of Michael Jackson, which was perfect. Yeah, in Prague. It was perfect. Actually, Michael Jackson brought along with him for the concert to do that. Well, it went from Stalin to Michael Jackson. And of course, that's perfect because that's a perfect expression of hegemony, because public statues are always an expression of hegemony. And now Michael Jackson was the ruler of Prague. And then the next time I got there, it was like a metronome, some type of weird thing that would probably kill you if you got too close to it, going back and forth like this. So it was typical kind of mechanistic, abstract meaninglessness, pointlessness. That's what was there. I don't know what there's now. What is there now?
Okay, yeah, we have we also here have this. Let's say when the regime collapsed here in our part of the world, they also had some guys that wanted to take revenge on what they saw was a symbol of oppression, and so a lot of these monuments went down. And basically, here is an interesting part. You have two urges competing what to put on the empty pedestal here. You have one, let's say the national traditionalist. They put some mythic figure from the nation's history, some king or some sort of that, some national hero. Or you have the other, let's say, more educated or the more cool crew that wants to put some abstract stuff, like a big golden ball or something like that.
Yeah, right.
So we have this dichotomy now competing for that. Why it's basically more or less over. It's the pedestals are not in the focus of the.
But do you have an identity crisis? Is that the problem now? You don't know what to put on the pedestal? Who would you put on the pedestal now?
I don't know. Yeah, that there is this
dilemma.
Yeah. We got
Our Lady of Medjugorje.
Yeah, we actually we had this yeah, it was even funny. We had this Franjo Tuđman statue being put in Zagreb, and they gave this project to some expressionist sculpture. So when the statue was presented, there was the son of the President Tuđman, and he says, "Well, I cannot recognize him as my father." It was,
Wait, it looks like Slobodan Milosevic.
I said,
you can't tell the difference. Maybe
so the Tuđman sounds,
maybe Tuđman, who knows?
Yeah. The Tuđman sounds looks at his father's. It was supposed to be his father's, let's say, sculpture, and he does not recognize it. So it was like funny. Okay, yeah, we have. I mean, we do have problems with identity because we have a religious identity, and it's very inconvenient when you have a religious identity, when you have a religion so deeply embedded in your identity. Because if you in a way dislike or you don't agree with this religion, you automatically have problems with, let's say, with your nation, with your
That's
identity.
right. Yeah. That's right. So you have an identity crisis.
Yeah.
Or I was in Estonia in the 90s, and there is this woman out there with her watercolors, of basically the ruins of downtown Tallinn, the old fort there, and so on and so forth. So I said to her, is it easier now to produce art now that you don't have a communist regime? And she said, no, it's more difficult. And I said, why? And she says, well, because George Soros is the main funder of art now, and he just wants pornography and blasphemy.
Wow.
George Soros is not interested in watercolors of your city. So that's added to the problem here. And now when you have total Jewish control over the art world, which is what we have now, you have blasphemy and pornography. So you have Piss Christ, which is a crucifix immersed in urine. Why is that art? Well, because some Jew put it in a museum. That's why. And so it's the equivalent of truth is the opinion of the powerful. It's art if someone puts it in a museum. I think who was the guy? The guy who did the urinal. I forget his name now. The Frenchman. Anyway, he was obviously what he was doing was exactly that, and that's what the point he was trying to make. So it's just become, that's the end of mimesis. In other words, if it's mimesis, you can look at it and say, oh yeah, that's nature. That's nature to advantage dress. That's art. It's beautiful. Once you get away from mimesis, you have no way of judging. And once you have no way of judging, that's when the rich and the powerful take over, and they start telling you, this is art, because we said it is, and if you're too stupid to understand, we will laugh all the way to the bank.
Well, the bottom line could be that USSR had much, let's say, nicer and more aesthetic sculptures, but you guys with this pop art won the Cold War. So,
yeah, that's right. So nice guys finish last. Not to say they're nice guys, but yeah, you're right. I think that was the classic example of this in music was Shostakovich. And thank God Stalin saved Shostakovich. he would have been doing obscure Jewish music for the rest of his life until Stalin decided he didn't like what he was doing, and it was either going to the Gulag or writing a piece of music. And so we have the Fifth Symphony as a result of that, which is, I think, a great piece of music. So thank you, Stalin, for saving music in the Soviet Union.
Do you know the true story about the librettist that got shot in the USSR? It was an opera. It was called Orango, I think. It's a funny story. So the Russians, I mean, not the Russians, the Soviets, the system wanted the new man. You know, they wanted this is like a communist version of the social engineering, but it's not completely social. It's also biological. So they see an orangutan that is immensely powerful animal, and it's kind of look like a man, and they have some experiment trying to mix the genes or whatever. Do this. It's immediately after the war, so it's must be some crude experiments or some stuff. So the project gets abandoned. But this guy knows about it, gets the information, and writes and makes an opera about it. I think the name of the opera is Orango, something like that. Well, I think that Stalin was still alive. So basically they do one performance, and the next day the the guy that wrote the libretto is shot, and but the guy that wrote music was very famous, and so they spared his life. So that's the that's the story about the opera. Okay, Mike, it was a pleasure talking with you. I found out about a lot of interesting stuff, and it will be interesting clip to see. Thank you.
Yeah. Good. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Mike. Bye. Good evening.
Bye-bye.